Okay, today is Wednesday, February 5th, 2020. This is the Cluster API office hours meeting. Cluster API is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. And if you need access to this document, please join the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list. We do have meeting etiquette for our meetings, which essentially is be nice to each other. And please use the raise hand feature of Zoom if you would like to comment on something. Please add your name to the attending list. And if you have PSAs, demos, or discussion topics, please fill in the appropriate sections and we will go through them. So before we get started with the PSAs, something that we like to do is give time for new attendees to say hi if they're interested. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you would like to introduce yourself, I will pause now and see if anybody is interested.
Hi, Prakash here from Dell. And this is not my first meeting, but I come off and on and off, so I'm just trying to catch up. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else on mute, so we'll move on to PSAs. Jason, you've got the first one.
Yes, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are organizing another meet and greet breakfast for KubeCon EU, similar to what we did in San Diego. I've created a sign-up sheet, so if anybody is going to be in Amsterdam and would like to attend, please do. The Google Form's there. We don't have a location yet, but depending on how many people we have respond and how many people are interested, we're going to lock down a location, and I'll send out a meeting invite to anybody who signs up as a reminder as we get closer. It will be on April 1st, so it's that Wednesday of KubeCon, the second day of the actual conference.
Sure, I'll sign up for it. Thanks.
Prakash, as a reminder, please use the raise hand feature if you do want to say something. Thanks. Vince, you are up next.
All right, so I'm gonna spend a few minutes to talk about conversions because it's like a recurring topic, and we're trying to get this very solid for V1 Alpha 3, so that folks upgrading for V1 Alpha 2 are like it's a great experience for them. So if I can still the share screen, I'd like to share something. Can you all see this?
Yeah, it's a little small, at least on my screen.
Better?
Works for me.
Okay, so one thing that we have been doing like in the past few days, and this is mostly like relevant for infrastructure and Bootstrap providers, we have been talking a lot about how to convert from V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3, and we started like with just like generated the conversions, which like you can see here. Now, like in the past few like weeks, we found like a few issues with that, which like, for example, one, if you add a new field, when you convert back to V1 Alpha 2 and now back onto V1 Alpha 3, you actually lose the data. So in Cluster API, there is a util conversion package that will help you with that. So for example, here, when we want to convert from V1 Alpha 3, which is the source in this case, we make sure to preserve the data into an annotation in JSON format. And then we're going to convert back from V1 Alpha 2 to 3 again. We make sure to restore the data. Turns out like this is like not like, well, it was enough to kind of like preserve the data. But for fields that you need to manually convert, like then you need to do things like this. For example, endpoints went from a slice to a single endpoint because we were always using a single endpoint. So we have to like perform manual conversions. For these kind of tests, for this kind of like conversions, like you would have to write manual tests for this because like you don't know like how kind of like it will work like in the wild. So like you usually want to have a conversion test here and make sure that like, for example, you have you have tests like when you convert from V1 alpha 2 to 3 and vice versa. The restoring that I showed, like one thing that we just added was fuzzing like the objects to make sure that like we don't lose data. So in the util conversion package, we added a new function that lets you test like the conversion from 3 to 2 and back to 3. This is a very generic function, so like you can use any hub version as the first parameter and any converter as the second one. And we found a lot of issues and like a lot of data we were missing when we added these this fuzzy conversions. So for any infrastructure Bootstrap provider, I would really suggest to do the same. And I've been working on AWS today and like found some issues there as well. So this is probably relevant to CapV, CapZ, and like any other provider that wants to work with Cluster API. Questions, comments, concerns?
I would add that we also initially went down the wrong path of returning an error if we couldn't convert from 3 to 2, from V1 alpha 3 to V1 alpha 2, because we'd added a new field in V1 alpha 3 and it wasn't available in V1 alpha 2. And so we just said, nope, not going to convert, return an error. And in talking to SIG API machinery, we learned that you basically can never return an error if conversion is encountering some issues. Like basically it needs to be the equivalent of, I need to panic if you're going to return an error from a conversion function. And so that was why Vince added the approach to save all the data from the newer version as an annotation in the older version when converting down, so that when we go back up and do a full round trip, we can restore anything that doesn't exist in the older API versions. Jason, I see you had a question in chat. Would it also make sense to round trip from 2 to 3 and back to 2? Probably.
Technically, would always go to V1 alpha 3 first. It would never start from V1 alpha 2, because the storage version will be V1 alpha 3 anyways.
Well, but if you...
Well, I meant more for the case if somebody submitted a V1 alpha 2 resource, it was stored as V1 alpha 3, and then they request to retrieve the V1 alpha 2 resource.
Yeah, I think we probably could just update the fuzz test func to do both round trips.
Yep.
Warren, you've got your hand up. No? Okay. Tim?
You're muted if you're speaking.
He's not muted. We can't hear him. All right. I'm going to mute Warren here. Elmiko, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a quick question for Vince here. I haven't seen these like fuzzy conversion tests before. Could you talk a little bit about the fuzzy aspect of it? Are you actually fuzzing inputs to the conversion, or how does that work?
So because we were losing data before, one question was like, how are we going to make sure that like going forward, if we add a new field, we also going to add a test, right? And because it's up to the person that like it's making that change to remember that, it's really, really easy to miss. So what we did instead was that like if you add a new field, then now the fuzzy test will do 10,000 iterations of like a bunch of different fields, like populated or not. And when the conversion happens, we're like 100%. Well, we'll catch it, right? Like, and that's like the goal for this change to catch those errors.
Okay, cool, awesome. Thanks for the description.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So traditionally, that once it's been stored in a given up version, you can't necessarily always down convert. So having a round trip to be a down conversion should be like a non sequitur. If it's been up converted, then you can't round trip to get back the previous version because there's no guarantee that you'll be able to do that.
From
not sure.
as a storage version, you mean when the storage version gets changed?
When the storage version goes to V1 Alpha 3, there's no way you can guarantee that if you try to request a V1 Alpha 2, that you can get back that thing. Traditionally in the API machinery, it's always been that way from my understanding.
Well, with CRD, you can request an older version and it will go through conversion webhooks. That said, like that older version has to be registered with the API, like as a CRD version. Otherwise, you won't be able to get it back.
Yeah, but in the main machinery itself, in the machinery proper, like I remember having this conversation a long time ago. Once you up convert, there's no guarantee you can ever down convert again, right? There's like once you've made that, it could be a destructive action where stuff is no longer compatible. So once you've made that transition, there's no guarantee that the fields that you previously had are good or valid.
That's fair, and we're not planning on changing any of the stored versions unless you have something that, well, actually, no, I take that back. We'll have to see how things go, Tim. We basically are at the mercy of what the CRD API server does. Any other questions or comments on conversions? Okay. If you do have questions or problems trying to get them to work, please come find us in Slack and we will help out. Okay, Chuck, I will stop sharing here and let you go over the demo you've got.
Very cool, thank you. Cool, hey everyone. So I've been working on, or this has been kind of a community effort to build out some end-to-end tests for Cluster API using the Docker provider as the infrastructure provider. And I just wanted to show everyone here how to run those tests locally so you don't have to wait for Prow. And it helps give you some nice signal with what you're developing. So let me find the terminal. Great, does this look okay?
Good for me.
I'll assume it does. Great. Yep, so if you want to run these tests locally, you're in your Cluster API directory, you can see that we've got a couple of make targets here. There's 3 of them. There's test full, test images, and just regular test. And it's sort of a cascading series of completeness of things you're testing. So if you're testing end-to-end full, that's going to generate all of the manifests, rebuild all of the providers. So you're going to rebuild the core provider, you're going to rebuild the KubeADM provider, you're going to rebuild the control plane provider, and you're going to rebuild the Docker provider. The difference between full and images is that full will also rebuild the manifests. So then images will rebuild just the images and not the manifest. And then test cap D E to E without any suffix will just rebuild the Docker provider for your tests. And so it should be as easy as test cap D, E to E. And if you have trouble with this, please file an issue. If this doesn't work on your machine or something, please file an issue because we like to make this as widely as possible. These tests are generally good for things that span controllers. So if you are making a change that, say you've got to add something to an infrastructure provider that's going to get copied into the cluster, the core cluster object, this would be a great tool to do that, to test that change without having to manually rebuild all your things and spin up clusters and all that. So it's just kind of a nice smoke test for those changes. You also don't have to run it locally if you don't feel like it. It is set up to run on Prow. So every PR that you open will run this job, but there are a couple of caveats to that. One, it takes about 15 to 18 minutes. If Prow is having a mediocre day, sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less time. It can take as little as 9 minutes. And it does not take that long on my machine, but I have a pretty beefy MacBook Pro. The other caveat is that it does flake in Prow about 90% of the time. Or sorry, it passes 90% of the time. It's about 10% of the time. I'm still working on those flakes. That's kind of an ongoing process. I keep squashing one flake and moving on to the next flake, but we'll get there eventually. It is not required for your PR. So your PR could still get merged and these ETEs could fail. But unless the failure looks familiar, it may actually be real signal. It is likely real signal. And what I recommend is just kind of running this a couple of times to get used to what the logs look like, because you'll kind of see failure. If you see a failure, it kind of takes a little bit of time to get used to what a failure looks like and what a success, well, not what a success looks like because we break green, but what a failure looks like, and to know if you're looking at a flake or if you're looking at an actual failure that you may have introduced. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. If you have trouble with it, I'm not going to wait for this to run because you don't want to sit here and just watch Kind doing stuff. But if you do have or interested in working on this, there are a number of open issues that are marked help wanted for the next milestone, whatever the next milestone may be. And oh, sorry about that. The Zoom UX is cutting off the bottom, but there's nothing really to see, so I'm just going to stop sharing. It's just running the tests. You don't need to see it run. You can run it yourself and give it a shot. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ping me or open an issue, and I'll do my best to respond.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, Amiko, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. This looks really cool, Chuck. Do you have any recommendations on kind of like how modest a machine we might need to run this? Like what would you recommend not going below, I guess? Yeah,
so this does all run in Docker, and my Docker is not using all of my resources. So let me just open up my, okay, they've completely changed the Docker desktop UI. So I would guess I think mine's using 6 GB of memory and 4 CPUs, and that runs in, 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and Andrew's got a question. Any interest in working a local EDE for Kappa as well?
I'm not quite sure what that means.
Yeah, I can clarify a little bit. So like we kind of do this, like we have some set of scripts that given, AWS parameters, we'll go like create a cluster and then we manually check some things. I'm curious what it would take to capture that in something that anyone using like Kappa could use.
So similar sort of tests, but using the Kappa infrastructure provider. Yeah, so those tests do exist in Kappa, and we are looking. I mean, I would like to convert those tests to use the framework tool that we've built out in CapB, but that's just a matter of priority right now, and there's nobody working on that at the moment.
Jason,
I think it's possible to do. But.
I think Jason probably can give a little bit of an update on Kappa here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we do already have a set of tests that run. They are intended to run under Prow right now, and the infrastructure there that takes advantage of what we call a janitor process to clean up any potentially stranded resources. There was some work done to make that janitor work on a local environment too. We just haven't really documented that very well. That said, we're in the process of having some tests that were originally created for the V1 Alpha 2 version of Kappa ported over to the current master branch. As soon as that work's done, we do plan on converting everything to use the EDE framework that Chuck mentioned about, and then we'll be in a much more similar process to the Docker EDEs.
Thanks, Jason. And I saw Cecile mention that CapZ has this too, the testing. So that's awesome. Okay, I guess let's go on to discussion topics. Vince, you've got a couple here at the top.
Yeah, so the first one is just cutting a beta tag for copy without a release. And this is because like it seems like it's might be confusing some folks that like it's still 0.2, but it's not. It's actually surprised 0.3 master, but Go module says like it's 0.29 something. So if that's okay with you all, like I just like push a tag today and it will generate like a new image, but we won't draft a release for it.
I'm seeing 3+1s in chat. I don't think there's any downsides, so I'll +1 that as well.
All right, I'll work on that later today. So the other thing that I had was a chat about 2140, which I'm going to link in chat, which we were discussing before on GitHub. It's pretty much like an issue that like covers, again, conversions. And one of the issues that we have with conversion is that the references, we need also to convert those. And for example, if you have a cluster, you have an infrastructure ref, that reference, when the cluster is going to be converted to v1 alpha 3, the reference is going to stay to v1 alpha 2. So we're trying to work towards is that like we automatically convert those, but now there's like kind of like the question is like, what if an external provider doesn't follow the same API version as we do? So like, for example, a v1 alpha 1 version of provider cloud, whatever, could be for v1 alpha 3 of cluster API. So at the bottom, like we're discussing about like either annotation or a label to apply on each CRD. So that like when you build the CRDs, you say, hey, the storage version for this kind is going to be v1 alpha 3. Tim, I saw your message.
I just don't understand the user story that you're trying to.
So there is like, for example, other providers that are not following our like API versions. So we can't just assume and upgrade the references to v1 alpha 3 just because we are in v1 alpha 3.
Yes, I understand now. Okay. Yes. So
Yeah.
if you have a chain set of providers, you cannot. Your particular webhook conversion can't walk through the chain because you don't have the other. You don't know about the state of the other stuff.
Yeah, we don't know pretty much which contract it will adhere to. And Chuck saw this like with data secret name, where like the machine was referencing the v1 alpha 2 version of data secret of the secret, but data secret name is not available in v1 alpha 2. And so we have to upgrade that to v1 alpha 3. So this is required before we release because otherwise like we'll require manual intervention for each reference, which is not ideal. And so what we were discussing before was to add this label to each CRD. Fabrizio has a comment.
Oh, actually, it's a comment on the packaging of the release. If you want to complete the discussion about the annotation you are discussing, please go on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know Vince and I had been going back and forth or about half an hour ago with some scenarios and what we need to do. I think it probably would be worth walking through some more detailed examples and try and come up with a design. Either it's what we talked about a couple weeks ago, or we need to refine it a little bit. I don't know that we need to take everybody's time to do it, but if you are interested, I think we can set up a Zoom after this, if that works.
Andrew has a question in chat. It says, is there a reasonable way to infer the stored version? Yes, you can just say like, I want to know about the CRD to the API server, and there can be only one stored version. So like while you walk through the versions, like you can actually know which one is the stored one. The problem is that like we don't know if the stored version like matches the contract of cluster API that's running like on the cluster. So let's say, for example, you have a v1 alpha 3 cluster API running. If the storage version is like v1 alpha 4, we don't want to update to the storage version because we don't understand that yet. And if it is, then we want to update the references because like it will be fine and we'll understand that.
And it sort of goes back to Tim's question a few minutes ago about if you upgraded the stored version, there's no path backwards. And I think I'll echo what I said before. We'll just talk through it and see what we can figure out.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other comments on this topic before we go back to Fabrizio's question about the release tag? Okay, Fabrizio, over to you.
So my question is, with the new tag, is it possible to have also CAPD included in terms of manifest and also image? Because this will really help in testing cluster cattle and getting and kick off on v1 alpha 3 from a real repository.
So I think if I push a tag on CAPI, it won't build the image for CAPD. But you mentioned manifests for this tag. Like I'm trying not to release any manifests or like publish any releases.
Okay.
If you do need, we could, but this will take more time. But we could make a draft release, but in pre-release with a pre-release flag. Yeah, but we could chat afterwards on Slack. If you want.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So Andrew, you have the next topic here about kubeadm control plane machine adoption.
Yeah, so one of the things that we would like to be able to do with some ease is when we move to v1 alpha 3, also have a clear path for moving under a kubeadm control plane object with existing v1 alpha 2 machines that would be theoretically up converted. So there's an issue with some discussion on it. I would like to, maybe direct some attention there. So to see if is this something we can come to a conclusion on how it should work? And then I'm happy to take the issue and run with it. I just wanted to get some better consensus around how this might work.
I'm all in favor of it. Jason and Nadir, I know you two had been doing a lot of the legwork, and Daniel as well with the control plane. What are your thoughts?
So I think we had a discussion on that issue, and you mentioned trying to diagram up some of the ideas that you had. I think that would definitely be a great first step because, as you can see through talking through the issue, we were talking a lot of abstracts. So putting some type of visualization to the process, I think would help out quite a bit. And I look forward to seeing what you can come up with.
Cool.
I think this is also an area where once you get a little bit of agreement on an approach, it can get coded, we can merge it, and if we find out that there's issues, we could just flip it off, have the option to disable it or require you to enable it in some way while we work through the issues. But in the spirit of iterating fast and often, I think trying to get it coded, merged, and tested, warts and all, is better than waiting for the perfect design.
Cool. Yeah, I'll do both those things. I will both diagram and come to the table with something.
Cool. Vince?
Yes, I'm going to admit I didn't read the whole issue, but I had two questions. One, is this going to be something like release blocking? And two, is this going to be opt-in or opt-out?
So I would say probably not release blocking, only because there's like potentially label hacking that you could do to get this behavior today. It's just like not the best user experience. Have not tested that, and someone can check me on it. But I think somewhere in here we discussed opt-in, opt-out in here with like flags and things like that. I don't know where we landed, but I think there's a good argument for either.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else on this one? All right, Andrew, your UX one is next.
Sure. So we have had Cluster API deployed in the wild for a bit now, and different kind of engineering teams here have been like interacting with the APIs. And one of the things that has been at least a little bit confusing for folks is this whole like immutable template, make a new one kind of process. And I kind of just wanted to raise this again just to see like, are we sure that we're getting the value of having those templates be immutable that we think that we're getting? Because, for example, right, like nothing right now is stopping me from editing the template and then adding an annotation into my machine deployments template. Like it will add new machines that like don't match the original template. So I'm thinking like, is this something that we intend to like validating webhook out of in future releases, or Vince just said winky face, we have a bug, question mark.
Yeah, we had intended to add validating webhooks to reject updates to templates outside of, I don't know, maybe labels, although I don't know that it's super useful to label them. But yeah, it could be a bad UX, and maybe we need to come up with something else. But I don't think it's going to change in the Alpha 3 timeframe. I don't think there's time. Vince, or sorry, not Vince. Jason, you got your hand up.
Yeah. So the biggest challenge that we have with the templates, and the reason why we decided to go down the immutable path is we don't necessarily have a way to get what the old data was. We don't have a good way to be able to revert that in the case of like a rollback type operation. And I think that will be the challenge if we want to remove that immutability, is how do we preserve what the contents of that were to enable kind of that rollback.
I think if you want to keep track of this so we don't forget the conversation, you can open up an issue, Andrew, and we can rally there to see if there's any changes we want to make.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
All right, and next up is you also, roadmap for defaulting based on infrastructure and Bootstrap pairings.
So this is kind of a different angle of the same issue. We discussed this at the face-to-face way back in September, and I wanted to kind of bring this back to the forefront that, in the kind of decoupling effort of V1 Alpha 2, we lost a bunch of UX in that, like, nothing says, I'm using the AWS provider, so my kubeadm Bootstrap config or my kubeadm config needs to be cloud provider AWS or nothing will work. And we've been kind of hitting this a little bit because like we try to say to our engineering teams, like, hey, yeah, like you can make your own infrastructure and it goes like this, but please have these fields set because otherwise it won't work. The other thing I'll say is like, we're gonna approach this with a webhook for now, and maybe some logic that might be upstreamable. So I don't think this is something that folks need to like jump on now, but I wanted to bring up the topic because it's a thing.
Yeah, there was an issue that we opened about like using config max for defaulting and things like that. Like they could vary by provider. I think this is also like on the roadmap that the UN did, right? Like something that we're probably going to tackle next improvement cycle.
I don't remember if it's in the roadmap. Let's see. I think yeah, it's down here under TBD.
Yeah.
So I know we've had a few different ideas. Like there's been a lot of discussion last year on how to possibly do what you're asking. There's also there's another issue that doesn't necessarily look like it's exactly the same thing, but this one right here about supporting machines that have the container images baked into them that aren't from the Kubernetes Docker registry. And some of the ideas that are in here are, I don't remember specifically what it was off the top of my head, but some of them are about trying to do similar types of defaulting or pairing like you're talking about. So I think we as a community need to try and brainstorm on these couple of issues and see if we can come up with something that works, whether it's webhooks or some first class configuration element that says I'm a bootstrap config, but I actually need to wait until another participant fills in some information. And then you have another controller that is that participant that knows, oh, the infrastructure is AWS and the bootstrapper is kubeadm. So let me go weave in my AWS specific stuff to kubeadm. Whatever that looks like, you know, I don't think that we've gotten anywhere close to having anything on the table yet.
Yeah, that's fine. I think what we'll probably do is like look at the issues that already exist. And then I think we're going to implement something just we have a good understanding of what defaults we want even beyond like the kind of basic Kappa stuff. So like we have a clear path to getting some code together. And then I think what we'll do is just share that with the group and see kind of how it works and iterate from there, if that's cool.
Sounds great. All right. Any other group topics before we move on to, I'm not going to do a full burn down today, but just a status check on some of the high touch items for V1 Alpha 3. Elmiko.
Yeah, so I guess I have kind of a project culture question, perhaps. I'm relatively new to Cluster API, and I'm looking for ways to get involved. So I've been looking at the issues in the upstream repository, and I'm noticing, there's a lot of the good for newcomers issues are kind of assigned, and looking back through some of the older issues, I see discussion. Like I've got a patch ready, and maybe the issue is assigned, but nobody is doing anything. I'm kind of curious what what would the project prefer on some of these issues, or how old an issue is it okay to start poking at? Say, hey, is anybody working on this? Like you said you were working on it 2 months ago, but I don't want to be rude, but I'm also kind of curious to get involved.
I think if it's 2 months, certainly it's totally fair to poke. I don't have a hard and fast rule in my head for a timing for when to start poking people. Tim's got a doc that he's going to share in momentarily with some information about what active means, which is this one. What am I looking for in here, Tim?
Be assigned, but unless you actually have a patch that's pending, patch that pending means that you're active on it. So it's always free game. The way we've always played the rules here is that a person can be assigned, but unless they're actually active, anyone else is welcome to work on the patch. You just have to try and talk with the author to make sure that they don't have other stuff that they might have been thinking about, but then have at it. So active is the only gating thing that says that there are patches that are pending for this.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering that about that too, because I was seeing like the preference to kind of say active when you start working on it, but I realize it doesn't always happen. Cool. I guess I'll just start kind of poking away on the issues then. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you. And if you can't find anything that is, that looks like a good thing to work on, feel free to reach out in Slack. And um, there may be stuff floating around in our heads that we just forget to file, and we need to do a better job of.
Okay, very cool. I mean, I was looking at some of the documentation ones because I think those are a good on-ramp. But like I said, I noticed these comments where it's like, oh, I've got something ready, but then that was like 3 weeks ago or something like that. All right, thanks.
Sure. And just to follow up on like good first issues, I definitely think documentation, like you said, is a great place to start. And Warren says documentation and tests. So we do have this master branch documentation that has things that you won't see in the main published book for V1 Alpha 2, such as cluster cuddle. This has been and is being completely rewritten from what we had in Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, and we could definitely use testing here. So if you're looking for stuff to do, I highly encourage you to take a look through this cluster cuddle section 2 here. If there's typos in the documentation, things that you think could be made clearer, things that are missing, please feel free to ask questions, open up PRs, and as you get through working, if you're testing cluster cuddle and you run into bugs, like that's great. It helps us find issues. You can file them and either work on them or somebody else will get to it. But that's a great place to start. And Warren also says, make serve book will help you test the docs locally. There is also kind of I don't know why they're not showing up anymore, but if you go into the pull requests, it used to be that you could go into one of these PRs and down at the bottom under the status, oh, now it's showing up, of course, make me a liar. There's a deploy Netlify thing in here. And if you open that, what you get is the rendered version of the book based on that pull request. What I was going to say is that you could just go to Netlify. There's a certain URL that you can use, which I can go dig up. If these links are not showing up where it says deploy Netlify, there is a way to get to it, even if it's not there. But now that it's showing up, you can just use that.
This is really tremendous. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Is the Netlify link for each PR?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I saw like changes from another PR into my link, for example, but might be off by one, I guess.
Every time I've looked, it's always had the changes I've made, but I haven't really paid attention if it was pulling in other stuff too.
Okay. It should be unique to each PR, but
yeah,
there's always chances for bugs.
Okay. So in terms of V1 Alpha 3, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we do have 45 issues that are currently open in the milestone. I know that the cluster cuddle work is full and well underway. Same thing for Cube8m control plane. The machine health check has the initial skeleton or foundation that was merged, and there's an open pull request for the implementation, which is great. So thanks to Joel for getting that in. And then the machine pool work, I know that Juan Lee is trying to get the unit tests added sometime today or tomorrow. So I think that things are moving along nicely, but there's still a lot of work to do. So if you are looking for some place to contribute, please take a look at the things that are in the milestone and again, that are not marked active. And as we just said, testing and documentation definitely needs help as well. Anybody have any questions or comments around the development status here for Alpha 3? Anything I didn't cover or you want to know? Okay. If there's nothing else, then I think we can wrap up about 15 minutes early. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Wednesday and rest of your week, and see you next time.